But anyway, this is Jeff, my neighbor and my friend, and thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Karen. I always love coming here, kind of. I go downstairs and I walk through the shop, and then I'm like, I've got to do that again. By the third time I walk through, I always buy something. So it's already out in the car. I told myself I was not buying anything this time. I failed miserably. So, Karen told me she wanted me to talk about change. Most people want to know, okay, what are you guys doing with the lighthouse? How come the dock's broken? The cabins need shingling, whatever it is. And they think of that as change over there. It's not what I think of change. I think of it as maintenance. And maintenance has to be done. We do that. If y'all want to ask questions about any of that stuff, I am more than open to asking your questions. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. How many people in this room like change? A couple of people like change. It is not the normal human condition to like change. We like to have our cup of coffee. Well, yeah, I think I'm still talking to a crowd that drinks coffee. I don't know. Every now and then I mention coffee and people look at me funny like, coffee? That's bad for you. But we like our stuff the same. We don't like a lot of change in our lives. We want some consistency, something we can count on. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that. You can hope and dream for anything. But change is, that's really like the thing that we can count on in life. That really is the consistent thing that we see in life. I get a kick. My whole career, all I've done is move around the national parks around the country. Before that, I was in the Army, and they didn't care where they sent me. They just sent me. But the National Park Service, I've moved to some wonderful places. There's one characteristic about all of them that is the same. People love to move into those areas because they like it. The funny part of it is they like it the way it is when they come there. They don't ever want it to change. Even if they want something to happen in county government different, they still don't want it to change. They just want that thing to change. We institute change in a lot of things. We don't always like to recognize it. I came to Cape Lookout National Seashore. I've worked at seashores before. I've worked at Cape Cod. Everybody's heard of Cape Cod. It's a great seashore. It's not like this one. Cape Hatteras. It's not like this one. It changes all the time. Every single day. People ask me how long the banks are. And I say, let's see, today 49.376 miles. And they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know that. I've got no idea. But I do know this. Whatever number I give you, it's not going to be accurate. Because it does change. How many acres of marsh do we have out there? Well, let's see. We got 29,000 acres of land, big chunk of that. So let's call it 22,000 acres today. Maybe. 21,000, somewhere in there. I don't know is the point because it is constant. My favorite is, how many horses y'all got over there? We actually do, as of last week, have a pretty accurate count. It's 126. Last foal was born that we think, anyway, is going to happen. Might be another one pop out that we just weren't counting on because the mares didn't seem like they were pregnant. But as of last week is 126. That might have changed already. Don't know. So we've had, as a race, a lot of experience with trying to stop change. We're smart. We understand engineering. We've got scientists out there that understand lots of stuff. And so we have done a lot of things to engineer resistance to change. Inlet's not deep enough anymore. We got bigger boats than we used to have. Oh, well, we can dredge that. Beach is washing away. Oh, well, we can put more beach out there. We can pump it there. Better yet, I want to draw some similarities and differences to our sister park up north, Cape Hatteras, my nemesis. No, not really. Not really. The folks that work up there, great folks, love them to death. But we do have a lot of differences. The National Park Service, when we went into Cape Hatteras National Seashore, we were determined to stop change. We planted forests. We built lots of jetties. We pumped sand. We built giant sand dunes. We did everything you can imagine that they knew to do, that the Corps of Engineers, at probably the height of its being, although they might disagree with me today, it would take them at least 7 years to disagree with me because it'd have to go all through the lawyers. And they'd finally get around to it. But point is, they were at their height of their being, because if they thought they could do something and they had the engineer, they would try it. We did everything imaginable up there. Somebody not too long ago estimated that, and these are old numbers, but until 1972, Cape Hatteras National Seashore spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $47 to $57 million on hardening the beach, trying to resist the change that was happening on a natural barrier island. Now, back in those days, we didn't have NC-12. Well, NC-12 was really the solution for them. You know why? Anybody want to take a stab at it? You're not allowed to, Stan.
It's a road that has to exist.
It's a road that had to exist. Why did it have to exist? Anybody?
Because there are people that need to go from north to south, south to north.
Well, I'm an old dude. I'm an old dude. Did that before there was ever a bridge. Economics. That's what it boiled down to, y'all. Money. Tourism was where the money was at. NC-12, when they built the roads and built the bridges up there, don't get me wrong, great engineering feat. But we drew a line in the sand. Literally, we drew a line in the sand and said, "Ocean, you shall not cross." So now what we do is the sand piles up, we push it back. Problem with that is, in a natural barrier island, you take away its ability to change and adjust itself. You take away its ability to absorb what the ocean's throwing at it. And that's pretty much what they've done up there. That hasn't happened at Cape Lookout for a variety of reasons, right? I mean, government come in and took it. Now, I say that jokingly, but basically that is what happened, right? State of North Carolina had a lot to do with that. They wanted Cape Lookout National Seashore to happen down here on the southern Outer Banks. And people were displaced doing it. Things changed. But what we do have out there now that we would not have is a naturally functioning barrier island. We do have assets, man-made assets out there. I'll point to Long Point cabins on North Core Banks. Some folks call it Portsmouth Island. Actually, Portsmouth Island has its own island. It's part of North Core Banks. But Long Point cabins, been there since 1940s. Wasn't called Long Point cabins then. There were camps over there. Eventually it became a commercial entity, and people could take the ferry over there, fish out of those camps. Some people owned the buildings over there. You know, and it didn't change. Happened for a long time. People remember those days. They talk about them all the time. And they're sad that they're not here anymore because government came in and took over. Yeah, I find that a little bit offensive. We've tried to maintain things over there, but the fact of the matter is Hurricane Dorian, was really an eye-opener over there. Really didn't do anything different than has happened over there before, but it's been a long time since it happened. And people have forgotten that we can have a sound side event that is incredibly devastating to the banks. Y'all familiar with Hurricane Dorian? Some of you are. So Dorian came by the banks, went in up there at Hatteras. Didn't matter that Dorian did not hit Cape Lookout National Seashore. What it did do at the worst time it possibly could is shove a whole bunch of water up into the backside of Pamlico Sound, pushed it up there, and then it kept going. And that water said, "Oh, we're leaving now." and it left at high tide. It came across North Core banks. The scientists had been there. 7 to 9 feet of water came and hit North Core banks. We had somewhere in the neighborhood of 99 cut-throughs on North Core banks. And it was kind of devastating to me because I hadn't expected it. Getting hit by a hurricane, no big deal. No, been through it. It is a big deal, but been through it plenty of times. Know exactly what we need to do to recover. Know how to assess things, how to get the resources in here to recover. There wasn't anything to recover. I mean, that island had been sliced and diced. By the time we got finished figuring out what had happened over there, 20% of the sand volume of North Core banks, almost 22 mile long, 21.675 mile long island, had lost 20% of its sand volume. 20%. Y'all, that's change, but that's not like change that happens over time that you can get used to. That is literally overnight change. I mean, one day it was one way, and the next day it was different. So that was it was. We had done some really cool things out there to deal with things that we were seeing in overwash and normal hurricane events. Long Point Harbor, for instance, always filled up with sand from overwash events. We had a great idea. We'd build a berm across there, channel the sand overflow, overwash, into the marsh where it's supposed to go anyway. Then it wouldn't fill up our man-made harbor that we were busy protecting. Worked great. It worked great. It was my idea. Right up until we had a sound side event, and it came from the other direction. And what it caused was massive scouring right in the middle of a Long Point camp. Massive scouring right where our public water supply system was, right where our powerhouse was, right where our big pavilion was. Took them all three out. When we got out there the next day, there was nothing but a big hole. And by big hole, I mean I waded out there up to my neck and then thought, there's a lot of deep water out here and there could be big fish in here. I think I'll wade back out. But it was all gone. So change hit me, slapped me upside the face. I was going to run up to Portsmouth that day to do a quick assessment up at Portsmouth. I was going to hop on an ATV, run up the beach. While one of the maintenance guys, Ricky Daniels, stalwart, been there a long time, great guy, he was going to assess the Long Point cabins. We could see most of everything, so we knew it couldn't be too bad. I got 50 feet north of the cabins and hit my first cut through. And I thought, oh wow. And then I thought, well, it can't be that deep. I waded out to it. I just needed to get about chest high before I decided I would get an ATV across it. But I thought, okay, well, this is a problem. We'll have to run up in the boat. Ricky came, when I met up with Ricky in Long Point just a few minutes later, because I didn't get far, he said to me, there's a massive channel down there by the octagons, and then there's one on the other side. And I said, what do you mean a massive channel? Does it go all the way through? He goes, it goes all the way through. That's 3 cut-throughs within the space of a little over half a mile. So we get back in the boat and we head up to Portsmouth. And as we're going along, we kept on seeing over there on the banks, you could see the dune line. We were running the inside route, staying up in close because we wanted to see what we could see. And you could see the dune line and then nothing. And then a space. And then the dune line started again. But it was like it was cut by a knife. And Ricky and I were looking at each other and we were saying, are those cut-throughs? Because this was, we're trying to process this overnight massive change that's happened out there. We get up to Portsmouth, we watch those things all the way, we get up to Portsmouth, find devastation up there, every single historic structure damaged, ones that had been there relatively untouched by too many bad things for, at that point, 70 years. We had houses up there, been through a number of hurricanes, but really hadn't been hurt badly. Isabel was the last time a bunch of the houses up there at Portsmouth got damaged. This time it wasn't a bunch of the houses or, one over here that's really damaged or one over there. Every single historic structure up there and some modern ones took damage. Several structures were completely destroyed. It wasn't just one or two. So once again, it's like literally yesterday these structures were fine and today they're not. And it wasn't wind damage. This was flood damage, but it was of a proportion we had never seen before. So we've kept, it's not scientific. We got scientific after this one. It's not scientific, but we've kept this ledger board up there where the maintenance guys would make a mark wherever the high water was, so we could just see, and then we'd write on what storm that was, and everybody's kept that up over the year. And we had a bunch of storms down here low, about thigh high down, and then there was Dorian, and it stood up there all by itself, how high that water was. And water, these buildings had been flooded before. I mean, these people, the folks that lived at Portsmouth, they were very savvy to the weather. They didn't have a weatherman that gave us 72 hours or 96 hours notice that a hurricane was coming. They'd get out there in the morning and look up at things and go, we got a blow coming. And today we have all kinds of warning. We can evacuate if we're smart. They didn't then. They lived with it. They made a life out of that constant change. It was part of their lives, something we don't have now. We think we do because, let's see, my kid's going to college, that's change. My wife no longer fixes me breakfast, that's change. Whatever it is, there are things that are happening in our lives that are change. But it is not massively, hopefully, I'm speaking in generalities. Don't mean to talk to anybody specifically. Maybe your life constantly has major change. Most of us don't. But their lives did. It was constantly changing. If you live by the weather, if your house continuing to stand is based on what happens with flooding and the weather on a routine basis, you live with constant change. So the things that we were seeing out there were really turning us on our heads. They shouldn't have been. But Dorian was a big wake-up call to me. All the things that we've done up there at Cape Hatteras that I mentioned before, drawing a line in the sand, pushing the sand back. The problem is that barrier island is not a living barrier island. We fixed it in place. And now it's a dying barrier island. Now, how do you rectify that? Because, it is there's 3 million visitors that go to Cape Hatteras every year, 3.2, something like that. Huge financial generator for businesses. NC-12 is an important access, all those kinds of things, right? But if the island dies, if that island continues to erode and all they can do is put sand in front of NC-12 to keep it safe, how long is it going to be around? Were I somebody up there on those banks, I would be very concerned about the future. The problem is we did what we thought was right at the time, what science and our brilliant minds said we could do. The thing that I've come to see is just because we can do something, it doesn't mean we should do it. And we need to be very careful. We've got barrier islands out there that are alive and well. Devastating stuff from our perspective, just part of life for them. Because they deal with that change every single day. The complexities that affect how storms impact those banks, the complexities that impact and affect just the daily process out there, or frankly, they're beyond. Now, some of my friends point out to me, they say, well, they're beyond your mind because you're just a historian. Those are usually the scientists who have explained to me I don't understand, how to read a study, for instance. Yeah, I get a kick out of it. But no, I don't think that's it. there's something more to it. I feel very fortunate. USGS, the agency, and not just a couple of them, took a great interest in North Core banks before and after Dorian. They had just done a lot of overflights on the banks, concentrating on North Core banks as a part of a study they'd entered into with us and a few other agencies. We have extensive LIDAR records now that were done prior to mapping in LIDAR, prior to Dorian hitting. And I'm talking 1 week prior to Dorian hitting. So we had accurate information on elevations, able to get sand volumes, vegetation locations, where all of the sand fans were over there from previous, you could still see from previous overwash events. We had really good data. Well, we had such good data that they really wanted to see, as soon as they heard about all these cut-throughs, they wanted to fly again. We didn't have the money for it. They did. They funded it. They have done numerous overflights since then. And the greatest thing in my mind that's come of that is, we just had this meeting yesterday, and it's kind of the reasons one of the reasons I'm babbling about it. You know, as we try to understand change and what it's going to do to us, there are things. I'm sure you've heard of the bathtub model, the climate change model that takes sea level rise into effect. You can get on the internet and you do the little slider there, and you can see how far your house is going to be away from the water yesterday, as opposed to how it'll be that way in 2050. You know, slide it over there. It's like, oh no, it's showing I'm underwater. And in some places that is a fairly accurate model. It is not for Barrier Island, because we have accretion occurring on Barrier Island. We have a lot of, the vast majority of our sand movement occurs because of wind. You'd think it's water, and Dorian proved it can be water, but most of the time it's wind that causes the change that we see out there. So these models do not reflect the future when you look at sea level rise, for instance. USGS has taken such an interest in this, and they believe it's applicable for other natural barrier islands, but they have the data for ours. So they're working on a model right now, not only to project vegetation changes and sand movement changes based on wind and water, but also on storms and what they'll do to us, how they'll impact the marshes over there as well. So, you know, I'm going to stay with this change theme because the change is going to happen. My job, I'm the superintendent, right? So I'm the park manager. I'm the guy, the buck stops here. And I laugh only because it was probably a month, and we had our initial studies on North Core banks, but it's probably a month after that. My boss calls me up and he says, hey, listen, we need to get your evaluation out of the way, and I just want you to know the first thing we're going to discuss is how you lost 20% of your park. I'm like, manager of a barrier island, you know, that is a ridiculous thing to be called. So, but how do I manage the things that we are responsible for? So we preserve and protect not only that geology that's out there, but all the critters that go on it, and we also provide for public use. 2 missions that the Park Service is required to do out there, and sometimes they collide head on. And so it's a very difficult thing. But what this does help us do when we can predict change is to figure out how we're going to continue doing that. Dorian did some wonderful things for habitat, y'all. We had more bird habitat. We've got threatened and endangered species that live and come across Cape Lookout National Seashore all the time. And the bird habitat on North Core banks quadrupled after Dorian. Pretty spectacular thing. Our ability to provide for the use decreased significantly. Not only was the island diced up, and it took quite a while for some of those inlets to fill in, but our back road system. So for those of you that don't know, we have traffic in 2 ways on the barrier island. We have it on the beach, and we have a back road. The reason the back road exists isn't to have some other handy, cool place for people to go so they get a different view. It's so we can reroute traffic off the beach when we have to close it, either for bird nesting or turtle nesting, and turtle hatching, really. But without that back road, it makes it very difficult for also to provide for the use, one of our mandates. So in balancing those things, this change is very impactful. I'm happy to have any philosophical discussions you'd like to have after the presentation here, but the mandate exists, and there's not one in law that carries any more than the other. Now, I would argue that preserving and protecting is slightly more important most of the time, because if you don't have anything to preserve and protect, you don't. Yeah, who's going to use it, right? Yeah, there's nothing here. How would y'all like to come over? And we're also going to charge you to come here. Can't do anything, can't really see anything, but we're going to charge you for it. Yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense at all. But if we don't preserve it and protect it, there certainly won't be any place for people to enjoy. And if people can't enjoy it, why are they going to spend their tax dollars to preserve it and protect it, right? So it's a difficult mandate, but it's a cool mandate at the same time. My problem, and anybody who wants to enjoy the place's problem, is change. Things are constantly changing. The way that we manage things is often through law and policy. Law and policy is not very flexible. And a barrier island has to be. When you manage, when you have some type of level of control of people's use on a barrier island, you've got to be flexible in how you do that. Because I remember when I first came here, the ORV plan, off-road vehicle plan. It's a court settlement plan, court ordered. We had to do it. There were certain parameters in the law that made us say certain things. And, out of the 48.7 available miles at Cape Lookout National Seashore, the National Park Service is going to guarantee that 44.2 of those would be available to the public at all times. And, I'm like, who came up with that stupid idea? Which was not the smart way of doing it, because a lot of people in the room had come up with that stupid idea. But how do you do that, right? How do you say that we're going to do something in concrete that we don't really have any control over? Now, I had a lot of folks after Dorian that came to us and said, well, you can fill in all these inlets. Yeah. Well, just for fun, we computed it, and it was like 44,000 dump truck loads to fill just the major ones. And once people were hearing that, it was like, oh, that costs a lot of money. Yeah. Well, and there's that little problem about getting the dump trucks over here. And where are we getting the sand exactly? And most of the coastal geologists said, because of the way the erosion occurred, they said, be patient, wait. It will be okay. The way that the bars have lined up, at first there were these fans that just went out into the ocean, and that sand's gone. But very quickly, the bars started forming up, which was exactly what we wanted to see. And it's exactly what we needed to start getting sand overwash and accretion occurring again. And it did happen. And it's kind of my point on this thing. Sometimes things that we see as devastating change, if we just take a deep breath sometimes and let, in particular, a natural process occur, we might be far better off than if we had tried to do what we think is the right thing. We're struggling with some other things right now. I don't know how many of you are aware of the white paper that came out on the marshes in Core Sound, Pamlico Sound. The state and NOAA is heavily involved in marshes. We're very fortunate. The Beaufort Lab over here, the folks, Dr. Jenny Davis over there, she's over the marsh program now worldwide for NOAA, has a lot of knowledge and a lot of information coming in. And she's been involved in doing test plots over there in Core Sound and Pamlico Sound for 20 years. Carolyn Curran, who just recently retired, Dr. Curran, had done it for 30 years. Still lives here, and she can't keep her finger out of the pie. She's still involved, thank God. But they and a lot of other folks have just completed a study. It's been a long-term study on marshes in Core Sound and Pamlico Sound, and they believe with all their hearts. They're supported by some very knowledgeable science and professors and folks that are involved in marsh protection. 25 years from now, we are going to see an 85% loss of the marsh. Yeah, I hear by the intake of breath that a lot of people were not aware of that. This came out, I don't know, a month ago. Anybody remember seeing this? Anyway, it's out there. The information's out there. And it's not like it's voodoo science or anything. They have already lost 35 of their test plots that 20 years ago were functioning marsh and are now dead. So it's not like this is something we don't know about. The question is, what? Maybe the first question is, should we do anything about it? The second question is, what should we do about it? So change is occurring. How much change do we want to see? We lose 85% of the marsh. That's devastating in so many ways. I mean, you know, it's a carbon sink. It's a great thing in that way. It is the nursery of the fisheries. And, you know, we lose that kind of marsh and it will be devastating in some way, form, or fashion. I may not be able to define it, but it will not be good. We'll gain marsh too. I don't know if we'll gain enough. One of the questions we've got posed out right now is the marshes that are associated with the banks are at a slightly higher elevation, 6-8 inches. Not much, but slightly higher. And the question is, will natural accretion on that barrier island, if it continues to function like it is, even with sea level rise, will the marshes keep up with things? Will the barrier islands keep up with sea level rise? And the general opinion is yes. Core banks, we've got a sand bank over there that is sizable. And the general opinion is, yeah, the marshes right now at the current sea level rise indicators will likely keep up. I love words like likely. Wait a minute, was it unlikely a part of that likely thing? But will likely keep up with sea level rise. Here's the problem with that. Sea level rise up until the last 10 years was like this kind of angle. In the last 10 years, there's an incline. It's not quite that steep, but I broke this wrist. It doesn't bend like I want it to all the time. Anyway, it's not quite as steep as I just did, but it is steeper than the last 35 or 40 years that we can go back to and measure. So there is an acceleration in sea level rise. What does that mean? Nobody knows yet, but USGS is very interested in continuing on this model, so they are working on it. But that's change that we're going to have to deal with. I don't know what the answer is, and you know, as somebody that's supposed to be managing the National Seashore, that's a little bit troubling to me. But we are working on those answers. Nobody wants to see. I mean, for one thing, it's going to be devastating to the mainlands. Barrier Islands disappear. Chandelier Islands in Louisiana are the perfect example. Has anybody ever heard of those? Chandelier Islands were a string of barrier islands, much like our banks out here, and they no longer exist. They were damaged by I can't remember the name of the hurricane. Katrina was the second one that came in and ran over them. Pretty much erased them. And you know, the folks that studied the Chandelier Islands feel like if they had had more time in between events, they might have been able to recover. But they didn't. So, you know, if ifs and buts were fruits and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, right? So, you know, could the same thing happen here? It is possible, y'all. And it's change. So, it's funny, when I first started getting my head around what change meant at this place, I had a hard time doing it. Because I'm accustomed to things like, I've worked at forts. Fort Jefferson down in the Dry Tortugas is a great place to go. Been there for a long time. Going to be there forever. No, it's not. That's hard for me to get my head around. I love the Keys. Been there forever. Going to always be there. Maybe not. Yeah, I see some heads shaking. No, probably not. I was working the Everglades when Andrew hit, 91 or 2, somewhere back in there. And we stayed in a Nike missile base. And it was retired Nike missile base near Pine Islands. Pine Islands near the entrance to Everglades as you go to Flamingo. And we sat there in this huge concrete and earthen bunker, and it still sounded like a freight train coming over us. And then when we went outside, there were pine forests that were gone. There were a few little fence post looking things for trees that were still there. Houses, blocks of houses, not just a house or two, but blocks of houses were gone. Street signs were gone. And I will guarantee you this, roofing nails were everywhere. That was the one constant. We got flat tires pretty much anytime we drove anywhere. But one of my tires, when we finally counted them up, had 32 punctures in it all told. Yeah. Anyway, my point is that's change. So I'm not sure why the change that we see on the barrier islands here it took a while for me to get my head around it. Probably still not all the way around it, but I do know this. Fairly significant change from a human perspective. I'm 66 years old. Some of you in this room are a little bit older, some of you are younger. Our perspective is based on our experience, right? Can you say that? Is that safe to say? Maybe it's a little bit broader if you're really well read and you've traveled the world or something. But it's, the years and the things that we see within our experience help us measure change and deal with change. I've seen plenty of things, and my involvement with the natural world has been extensive. That awakening I had out there on that morning that we went over there to look at North Core Banks was pretty significant, and the amount of change that occurred so quickly, not to trees, that they come and go all the time, not to the dirt itself, although it changed out there, it was the very foundation of the banks that changed. I mean, that's massive change. Andrew, lots of houses knocked down, lots of trees knocked down, dirt was still there. It was. Dirt was still there. You covered it with water for a little while. Katrina, I was at Katrina. I drove a boat through downtown New Orleans quite a few times. I'd been to New Orleans before then. I got to tell you, I liked it better when I could drive and walk. But that was some pretty massive change. Guess what? Those places I was riding a boat back when Katrina went through, you're driving and walking again. And man, it's pretty smart. We've done a lot of things there. We've got underground water catchments in New Orleans now that would make Core Sound look relatively small. I mean, they're massive man-made facilities that we think will work. So, it comes back to the, what can we do, and can we do something? Karen, don't throw at me if I keep, because you know me, I'll talk until.
I know there are lots of questions too.
Okay, I'm going to stop soon and open up the questions. The thing that I hope that I'm conveying is that things that we see sometimes as change, even massive, devastating change, really aren't. They're just part of life. And it's how we perceive them and deal with them that's hard. Change on the banks. Okay, now, you want to know when the lighthouse is going to be? No, I'm kidding.
They do.
They do? Okay, I'll talk about the lighthouse. I assume there's some questions in for that. that
No,
you?
I just know.
Oh, okay.
I know.
Karen does know things. Okay, the lighthouse. So right now, the highest forces, and I don't know how to say this. I don't have enough money to do the lighthouse. This has changed too. 2010, we did an assessment of the lighthouse. By 2014, we had a project in place for the rehabilitation of the lighthouse. It was accepted by the Washington office in 2017. Then we brought engineers and historic preservation teams in here. Their private companies came in here and did a current evaluation, found far more deterioration and far more problems than were found in 2010. Some of them were extenuated by the fact that damage that was observed in 2010 was never fixed. And then on top of all that, when they came up with their estimates, which we got in 2020, y'all remember what was going on then, the world turned on its head, and what used to cost $1 now costs $3. So by the time we got to the bidding process, things were a lot more expensive. There was a lot more damage, and we cannot leave the lighthouse sitting there any longer without taking action on it, because there will be continued deterioration. Although I have to admit, after going through this, it probably would be cheaper just to build a new one over there. I mean, we built the first one for $75,000. Surely we could. But no, I'm sure it cost a fortune. So right now, I even hesitate to do this, but I'm going to just for fun. You know, federal budget and how agencies get money. It's public knowledge. It's not like I'm going to give y'all any trade secrets or anything, but the National Park Service gets certain funds that are awarded by Congress. One of them is line item construction. What Congress does, National Park Service says, here are the projects we've got. What would you like to fund? Congress picks 17 of them, funds them. So we got funded back in 2017 under line item construction. Congressman Jones was our congressman then, and very big proponent of the lighthouse, and absolutely supported it. And we got awarded $4.6 million towards the lighthouse. It was a little short. We're at about 14 million, 14.2, 14.3, although we're debating right now with the three top bidders on the job on a couple of points in there, and we're fighting that. I don't think it should cost us $40,000 a window to get the windows replaced. Historic windows are not cheap, y'all, but that's pretty steep. Anyway, we're working on that. Bottom line is we don't have enough money in the bank right now, but there is a surplus in line item construction. What the Park Service is doing is going back to Congress and asking them, hey, we'd like to reprogram these pieces of money from other projects to Cape Lookout's project so they can complete the lighthouse. Fairly confident that is going to happen because the comptroller for the National Park Service owes me a beer. Now, she reminded me the other day, that was like 18 years ago, but I said, well, interest? That's like at least 18, 20 beers.
And just speaking of Congress, I would like to acknowledge that Congressman Martin Lancaster is here, which was a terrific surprise. And I will tell you for the record, he's the reason why we're neighbors.
Really?
Yes, and I will always be. So it's so good to have you in the house.
Good to be here.
It's the truth.
And Noah.
Yes. If you were in DC, you could help, right?
Well,
Thank the Lord, I'm not.
it's interesting though, because the state has been, whenever we've needed, you know, the dredging out there at the Cape, any of y'all that boat out there, you know, what we call Barden's Inlet's opened up now. It's a nice run. There's no problems at all getting through there. But if it's not been for the state's involvement in that, it would not have ever happened. That was one of the biggest, most complex and difficult projects. But it took the federal government, both us and the Corps of Engineers, Carteret County and the state to come together. And y'all, I mean, I've always thought that the Corps of Engineers had a lot of lawyers, but you get all those entities together, all the lawyers get involved. And, you know, you put two lawyers in a room and ask them the same question. They're going to both, any lawyers in here before I go any further? Slanderous. Anyway, they won't come up to the same conclusion, but we worked through it with a lot of cooperation and stuff and kind of got that project through. But the lighthouse is coming together. We will know by probably September 20th if we've got the funding. I feel pretty confident now that we're going to have the funding for it, for the rest of it. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, they just put a ton of sand there,
Yes, that was part of the dredging project.
but what about moving the lighthouse?
Oh, so, to move the lighthouse, and that question has come, that's a fair question. So that question has come up several times because Cape Hatteras did it. Oh, I hate Cape Hatteras. No, I'm kidding. So Cape Hatteras did move the lighthouse. Logistically, moving the lighthouse when you have a road to get to it is a whole different world than moving it over there. So not only would we have to get the massive equipment over there, that's doable. We've looked at this question, but we would have to build about a 70-foot wide road from the lighthouse over to Cape Village, because that's the only place it would make any reasonable.
Because it's wider.
It's wider and it's higher. Cape Village, y'all. I don't know if y'all knew this, but it is absolutely one of the most stable places over there. It's wider, it's higher, but we're rehabilitating a couple of the cabins over there right now. 4 overnight stays. Coca-Cola House, Fishing Cottage number 2, which is Dr. Fulcher's old camp. Thank you, Stan. Those will be rehabilitated overnight stays and available to anybody who wants to lease them through the Great Island Cabin. So that's going to be a nice thing. Really excited about that. But the lighthouse, moving the lighthouse is just not practical where we are. If we had an NC-12, well, the world would be changed. Yes, sir.
The services out to the Shackelford and to Cape from Beaufort, where I live and have some dear friends, but some dumb people. What's the status of that?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so this is a fair question. There's change involved with it, so I'm going to answer it. No, I'm kidding. When in 2012, when we established ferry service out of Beaufort, Beaufort was established as a port and a gateway community to Cape Lookout National Seashore. The dream on Beaufort's end of it was that they would benefit from that arrangement with tourism dollars and exposure, that worked. The National Park Service committed to putting a visitor center in there, putting displays in there, signage, and staffing it at least during the visitor season, which we've done. And things change, right? We're talking about change. So Beaufort's position back then was one thing. Beaufort's position has changed. They still love the National Park Service, we're told, but parking is a problem, and fairness and development of the waterfront in another direction away from commercial services have all impacted their decision not to re-engage us with an agreement, which we had to have in order to require our concession to use those facilities. So if I don't have an agreement with Beaufort on a government level, then we can't say to our ferry service, hey, you're required to pay somebody for dock space and utilities and do signage and all these kinds of things in this town, even though we can't tell you you're going to make any money doing it. If we'd had an agreement in place, I could have required it. We just redid the lease. It's about to go out for public competition right now. And it is not in there. It is an authorized service, but not required. So conceivably, the ferry service could say, hey, Beaufort's now wanting to charge me too much money for these docks. It's no longer profitable. We're going to move to the dock we already own in Morehead City, or something else. We've also talked to the state museums about the Maritime Museum and the development over at Gallus Channel. Very interested in that. At some point in time, that would probably be a feasible place to run a ferry out of. It's not right now. So one of the things that the Park Service looks at is what are the benefits to our visitors when we have a gateway community. And you know, Beaufort was perfect, right? Restaurants, it's a great little town. Morehead City was also in the runnings there. Beaufort edged them out with the offer. But we look at those kinds of things. Are there amenities that they can enjoy? Are there museums? Are there places to visit? Are there parks? Are there restaurants, shops, things like that they're going to get? Beaufort was a perfect mix. Morehead would have been very good too. So it's kind of where we stand right now. I can't say Gallant's Channel right now because it doesn't have any of those amenities that really are appealing to visitors. Otherwise, we'd already been in agreement with the museum folks. So bottom line is right now, while I cannot order the concession to float out of Beaufort, they can if they want to. And as long as it's profitable for them to do so, I suspect they will. It'll depend on what direction Beaufort goes. And I do not understand. Yes, ma'am.
Did the crossovers in the North Core banks fill in? What year
Yes.
was Dorian?
So Dorian was 2019, September 2019, and one of the inlets has not filled to this day. We call it Evergreen Inlet, and it's up at the north end. It's about a mile south of the top end of North Core Banks, and it has not filled in. In fact, you can still run a boat through there, and people do all the time. Will it fill in? Don't know. Some of the other inlets, Drum Inlet, for instance, it stayed open for a while, but it's filled in. In fact, that's phenomenal what's happening there. At Drum, and this is another one of those things we don't understand, but at Drum Inlet, not only is that beach high now, we may see dunes forming there soon, but the really moving thing is it was 100, 150 yards from ocean to sound. Now there's a sand flat out there that stretches for half a mile on the back side of that. You know why? And Stan Riggs may have had the answer to this. His concept on this was all about inlets, not temporary ones like we saw in Dorian, but major ones like Ocracoke, Ophelia, Barden's Inlet, and Beaufort Inlet. And his feeling is that they're like turning on or off a garden hose, a tap of water. So if you in your house, if it's like my house, you turn on a tap over here, got good flow out of it. You turn on a tap in the other room, got okay flow. Turn on that third tap, your flow falls off, you know. You turn on that fourth tap, well, you're getting dribbles out of stuff. So that's kind of the way he explained it to me. With opening up Barden's Inlet, we have now reopened one of the taps that has been closed for a while, or at least limited in its ability to allow tidal flow through it. His supposition is that we may see Ophelia fill in. And it's kind of backed up by what we're seeing from where Drum Inlet was. The degree that's filled up there now. We really didn't expect to see it that rapidly there because it was flowing. Catherine Jane was another big one that's further up on the banks, but it filled in within about 8 months. But that change we're talking about, Barden Inlet, good stuff for boating, getting around and stuff like that, but it may have impacts that we did not foresee too. We'll see. I don't think anybody in here remembers when it was called Cedar Island Inlet before it filled in and blocked off. I don't see anybody going, oh yeah, I remember that. Because it was a long time ago. And then Ophelia opened up an inlet over there in that area again, and we had lots of flow, and it's continued on since then. It's going to change one of these days. Yes, sir.
I remember when they exploded Drum Inlet
You betcha. They tried.
in about 71.
Yep. So the Corps of Engineers, one of the rules. Oh, it's my son. Figures. When you give a presentation, is turn your cell phone off. Anyway, when this is the Corps of Engineers, we have the engineering technology. Do we have any engineers? I can see it now. Congressman Murphy called me up. Hey, listen, I got 7 complaints. Engineers, yeah, especially the lawyers. So they had the knowledge and the engineering expertise to open up drum, and it would be a smart thing to do. Well, it didn't work. They made a big boom. Lots of sand flew. I've seen the pictures. It looked like it was pretty impressive. And I guess it opened up briefly and then filled back in immediately. Another case where people fought change and thought we knew what was the best thing. It's funny when it comes to natural processes like barrier islands. I really have become a strong proponent of keeping our fingers out of that mix as much as we can. Yes, sir.
Parochial interest, Codge Creek.
Oh yeah.
Is it open yet?
Oh yeah, Codds Creek is done. I'm glad I've got pictures of the finished dock. I'll show you before. But yeah, so Hurricane Florence project. Did you say something? Okay, just checking. Hurricane Florence projects. This is 2018 that the damage happened to Codds Creek and a whole lot of other places in the park. And we're just now getting the funding. These are a whole different other federal level of funding. They're called disaster supplements. And so in 2019, they passed DS-18, Disaster Supplement 2018. And it covered funding for lots of places that were damaged by Florence. And then the wildfires started happening. So Congress said, well, let's take $40 million out of DS-18 and send that out west for wildfires. So DS-18 kept getting shipped away. It's funny that we do assessments right after something like that happens. And I think Florence, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of $24 million worth of damage. That's just to structures and dredging things where we had harbors. So, $24 million, that's a lot of money, but right? When they give money for disasters, it's a lot of money out there. Well, they came in to all of our projects that were DS-18 projects, and they said, yeah, okay, hey, this was a good one, no. This one over here, yeah, no. And just started slashing it, So, it's like they did give us some input on the most important projects that we had, and then said, take your most important project and figure how you can do it for 2/3 of the money that you said it was going to cost you. So things get whittled down. We finally get approvals on the things that are whittled down and the money they're going to give us, and things are happening now. But yeah, Codds Creek. So Codds Creek, the pilings out there are now minimum 28 feet deep in the ground. It's got flow-through decking on it, which should keep the water when it comes up from pulling up the pilings and doing damage to it. It looks great and it should be usable for a long time.
Great.
Yep.
One more question.
Yes, just one more?
That's it. We're almost out of time.
I can talk for one. Yes, ma'am.
Harris Lighthouse is currently being renovated. Did they get funding before we did, or are we just like a step?
Now, which ones?
The Cape Hatteras Lighthouse?
Oh, yeah. Cape. So, y'all, when you have $3.2 million a year and a base budget of $8.5 million a year, and 230 employees, you tend to get attention a lot quicker than Cape Lookout that has 530,000 visitors, a $2.9 million budget, which got cut last year, but and 32 employees. Yeah.
But they are a dark sky park.
But they are not.
That's right.
We are a dark sky park, yes.
I love the new lighting brochures you have at the museum.
Did you hear that? She saw the new lighting brochures.
I like the new lighting brochures. I need to pass them out to some of the neighbors.
I'll tell you, there's a lot of competition with Cape Hatteras, but we lose. It's not like it's real competition, but they are. It's a great place, but they are not the same as us. And the fact that we are hard to get to, and that we do have the kind of change that we have over here, it makes it more difficult to enjoy the place. So we don't have as much visitation. But honest to goodness, y'all, we're better off. If we built a bridge over there tomorrow, we would be Cape Hatteras. And I don't think anybody who truly loves that place ever wants to see that.
What makes,
Quality over quantity.
You betcha every time.
what makes Hatteras a dying island? What would your qualifications be?
So,
for that?
and by that, what I mean is they are no longer a barrier island that has accretion. As soon as you stop the sand from overflowing the island, you have stopped major part of accretion there. So that what they do with the dunes there is they push them back out on the beach, and they form this great line of dunes. Every time somebody tells me, all y'all need to do over at Cape Lookout is put Christmas trees out there and let them build the sand dunes, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, that's a great idea right up until water hits them. And that's what happens to the dune lines over there at Hatteras. And if you ever see any pictures after a recent storm, I mean, they've sandbagged and everything else over there to try to keep the dune lines in place. But they shove the sand back out there. It's good for us because the inshore currents bring that sand right down to us. More power. I tell them all the time, you betcha, pile that stuff out there, bring it on, we'll take it. But
The video at the Park Service explains that very well.
it does.
And that was done 20 years ago.
If Meryl Streep doesn't put you to sleep. I like Meryl Streep, don't get me wrong about that.
But still, we're talking about the message now.
Yeah, it's the message, yeah. What else y'all got?
Well, you said that the bird population had quadrupled. What about other animals?
Well, it's interesting. So piping plovers, which are one of our critical T&E species, we're on the south end of that. Fish and wildlife targets that we've had for hatching and stuff like that, we have never met. In fact, they're getting worse every year. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. What it means is they're likely staying further north. So you know, it's interesting. That is a great question, because what's impacting our user species, let's call them that, because we've got a lot of transient species that come through. September, we'll see 30 varieties of hawks and falcons, for instance, coming through Cape Lookout. A lot of people don't know that. It's best if you ever want to see birds of prey, it's time to be out there. So how much is the temperature change as we get warmer going to impact that? We think, we're just thinking this right now, we don't have the proof of it, we think it's the temperature that is impacting the piping plover population and why we're not seeing more birds. I mean, while it feels hotter to us a lot of times, sometimes those observational feelings are absolutely accurate, and that's kind of what we're thinking about that. The turtles are another big question, and a fascinating one too. So turtles are cyclic in that once they're born in sand somewhere on somebody's beach, then they go off, and let's assume they survive. We're talking about a surviving turtle because a lot of them don't. And they swim around, they get bigger, and they finally get to the point where they can have little turtles. They will typically come back to that place where they were spawned. And when that happens, it's cyclic, right? So a couple of years ago, we saw more turtle nests than we'd seen in many, many years, 548 or something like that, a lot of turtle nests. Well, if you went back in time, we'd have likely seen that same kind of numbers as a bunch of turtles. So we're having a harder time figuring out exactly when turtle numbers are falling off and when it's just a normal year. We're keeping much better records than we kept 20 years ago. So I think we'll get a better picture of that. But there's definitely change going on. I don't know that it's negative change for us. So I think our feeling right now is that our numbers are increasing. Cold stun turtles, we do have hard counts on, and we're getting more cold stun turtles than we've ever got before. So
What kind of turtles?
In the fall and winter time, when there's a sudden downturn in temperature, the turtles swimming around, they're cold blooded, so they just freeze up. We call them cold stun. And
Cold stunned.
cold stunned.
Got it.
That's that Texas stuff coming out, I guess. But and they sometimes they'll look dead. You know, you can go up there and pick them up and flop them around and stuff, and they just look dead, but they're not usually.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, since you're talking about change, what was the rationale behind changing the lights on the lighthouse?
That's a good question, because it is changed, and I'll tell you what. I have taken a lot of beatings over the years on different things. Nothing like that. And I for a long time, I stood there and went, look, call the Coast Guard. That's the Coast Guard's light. Well, people don't want you to hear you say, because they're not going to call the Coast Guard, because nobody will answer. Duty station, what's your emergency? You're not drowning? Okay, bye. So now the problem with the light over there, so it's an aero beacon. It's what you'd see in airports. You used to see in airports, big, powerful, bright light. It shined in my window at night, and I got to the point where I liked it, and when it was gone, I missed it. But it was a huge power drag to power that light. And when the cable that the Coast Guard put in began to fail, they realized ain't gonna happen. We're not gonna be able to keep this up. And they came to us and said, look, we have got to put in a solar light over there. That cable's failing. You guys are going to have to figure out something to do for electricity, because they'd given us electricity. It was a great relationship as far as we were concerned. We were taking every dime of electricity they would give us that came through that cable. Cable's failing. Coast Guard wasn't going to pay to put it back in. We weren't going to come up with $1 million plus it was going to cost, and close to that to remove the old cable. Incidentally, somebody found that old cable the other day over near the lighthouse and asked us if it would be okay to pull it up and sell the copper. And we were like, you need to talk to the Coast Guard. You seriously need to talk to them before you do that, because that's theirs. But so expensive to do that. We put in a solar system over there. It cost about $160,000 to do all the wiring to it, all the batteries, put the solar system in and stuff like that, and power up the lighthouse. But in order for that to provide enough power, it had to be an LED beacon. And while you can see that LED beacon from a long way if you know where to look, it does not light things up like the old aero beacons did. But that's the explanation for it. You betcha. It's not a very satisfying explanation. I truly did. I got to the point where I had to go away for a couple of weeks, came back, and I'm like, what's different? Because it's nighttime, and those lights would come through every 15 seconds. Then they were gone. Don't think Karen didn't have a discussion with me about that. And she was the one, she told me, you are going to hear about this. And I still hear about it.
When was that done?
Huh?
When was that done?
2017. 2017. Yep.
Just before Florence.
Huh?
Before Florence.
Yeah. Yeah, it was 2017.
Before Florence, no.
Yep. Yeah, it was done by November of 2017. Completed the whole
We just tell
process.
people to take their own flashlight so they can find the lighthouse.
Oh, thanks a lot, Karen. Hey, listen,
Which upsets Barbara enough, and she doesn't want your flashlights.
3 more years.
They can be red.
3 more years, when people ask me that question, when I say I don't know what you're talking about, it's always been that way.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody.
You betcha. I will. Oh, thank y'all. Thank y'all. I'll be hanging around. If you had anything you wanted to ask me, feel free. I'll try to babble about it. Thanks.